5 can't hold me back. In part 4, we learned many of the cool things that you can do with the drone. As you're building things, you'll pretty quickly run into the length limit of Minecraft's command line. So if I'm just typing here, well, of course it's not letting me do what I want here, but if I'm just typing, you'll find pretty quickly, there we go, I've reached the end of the line. So even if you don't run out of space, it gets hard to write too much code on a single line as it is, because you can't see much of what you're doing. So in this part, we're going to break free from that command line and learn some important JavaScript features. To get going with Scriptcraft and the drone, we went through some steps to set up our own Minecraft server using Canary mod. Now we're going to do a bit of setup to make brackets work well for writing code for Scriptcraft. So the first thing we'll do is we will click this little block style icon here, that's the extension manager. So we'll open up Brackets Extension Manager, and it will look at the available extensions, of which there are many. And we want to find JS Hint. Now I already have it installed. Assuming you don't have it installed, you'll be able to click the install button there, and it will install right away and be ready for use. The next thing is that we want to create a .brackets.json file. If you don't have one here already, you can right-click and say New File, and name it .brackets.json. So there's a dot in the front of the file. And these are the contents of the file. They'll be available on the web page for part 5. But basically, these contents are going to set up how we want brackets to check our JavaScript code for us. So computers are very picky about the instructions that you give them. And with this setup, basically brackets, when we save the file, is going to tell us if we've done something wrong right away before we even try it in Minecraft. So that'll be nice. So make sure that you've got Canary mod running and fire up Minecraft just as you did for part 4, and then we will get into working with JavaScript files. Okay, so we want to make a JavaScript file. You'll see a Scriptcraft directory here. Open that up. There's also a plugins directory underneath that. Okay, and there's a bunch of Scriptcraft plugins in there. So we right-click on the plugins directory. If you're on a Mac, control-click, and say New File. And it'll give us an untitled file here. So we're going to make a .js file. We're going to make one called mycottage. mycottage.js. JavaScript files generally end in .js. And when we hit enter, we now have a JavaScript file to start working in. A couple notes about this. Spaces aren't generally important. Use them as you like. But case is important. So if you see something uppercase, make sure you do it uppercase. If it's lowercase, make sure it's lowercase. I'm going to go through a lot of concepts in this video. Don't worry about it. You can play around with things, and we've got brackets set up to help you spot problems easily. So just experiment with it as you go along. I'm going to work through building up the Scriptcraft cottage. This is a good example because it uses the drone as we saw it in part 4. And when you're done, you can start modifying the code to build a house of any style you like. So let's give that a go. So I first spoke a bit about functions in part 4. In Minecraft, when we typed /JS cottage, we're running a function called cottage. Now we want to make our own function called mycottage. To do that, we will type function space mycottage, open parentheses, close parentheses, and then a curly brace, and we want to close curly brace also. Now my brackets is actually set up to close my parentheses and my braces for me. Yours may not be set up that way, but that's okay, you just type it. So function, this word here, function, is what we call a keyword in JavaScript. It has special meaning for JavaScript because it tells the computer that we're creating a function. These parentheses after the name of the function, which is mycottage, those tell JavaScript that we don't have any arguments that need to be passed into this. And then we follow that with curly braces. Those curly braces are used to block off a section of code. And actually, people call these blocks of code. Between those curly braces is where we'll put the set of instructions that we're going to be giving the computer whenever somebody wants to run mycottage. In part 4, we learned about some of the functions that are available on the drone. How can we use those? Because that's what we need to use to be able to make mycottage. And how can we add mycottage to the drone so that people can see it and use it just like cottage? That's what we'll get to next. So the drone is an object. Remember I mentioned that objects can store values by name? And those values that you can store in an object can even be functions that do things. A function that is stored on an object is something special enough that it has its own name. It's called a method. The drone has a method called extend, and we use that to add new features to it. And that's exactly how Scriptcraft's own drone features are added. To add my cottage to the drone, we put this at the bottom of our file. We'll type in drone.extend my cottage. So we call the extend method on drone, and we pass in our my cottage function. And Scriptcraft uses the function's name, my cottage, to figure out the name that it's going to be available as in Scriptcraft itself. So when we're working in Minecraft, by passing my cottage in, that it's going to be called my cottage there. That semicolon at the end of the line, that's how we tell JavaScript that we're done with this particular command. So we'll save the file, and they see this error down at the bottom? JSHint is telling us that it doesn't know anything about drone. So putting all of our code into a single file causes a variety of problems, so we just don't do that. Instead, we break our code up into modules. In Scriptcraft, there's a function called require that we use to get code that's in another module to be able to use it here. So if we want to use the drone, we will require it. So I say require, quote, drone, like that. And I put a semicolon at the end. So I've got quotes around this because this is a string. String is basically text. It's not, we're telling JavaScript that this is just plain text. You don't try to figure that out as a variable or anything like that. It's just text. So JSHint, if I save now, is still saying, now it's telling me I don't know what require is. And of course, we still haven't really defined what this drone with a capital D is. So the reason that we don't know where require is, how do we get require? Well, Scriptcraft just makes that available to us all the time. It's what we call a global. So what I do is I need to tell JSHint, you know what, you can just ignore that require thing. So I say global require. Okay, now what's up with this /star thing? So /star is basically a comment in JavaScript. By saying /star global and then // that / is the end of the comment. This is basically a special comment that JSHint is going to read, and it's going to say, oh, okay, you're telling me that require is a global, and I don't need to go find that somewhere for you. So if I save now, you can see that the require complaint went away. So how come we still don't have a drone yet? What do we do there? Well, so require is a function, as I mentioned, and function, it turns out, not only can they do things, but they can return values as well. And require as a function is going to go look for that drone module, and once it finds it, it's going to return whatever that module is, whatever that module contains. And in this case, that module contains the drone object, or basically the drone class that we want to work with. So, so yeah, we can get that value out, but where do we store it? Well, if you want to store a value that you want to hang on to, and you want to give it a name that you can use to refer to it, use the var keyword in JavaScript. Var makes a variable, and we're going to make a variable called drone with a capital D, and then we say equals require, quote, drone. So what this whole statement now is saying is we're going to create a new variable called drone with a capital D, and we say that that variable is going to be equal to require, open parentheses, quote, drone, unquote, close parentheses, semicolon. So that's going to look up the drone module. This is the name of the module. It's going to look it up. It's going to return that value, and it's going to put it in a variable called drone. So now if I save this, the error has gone away, because now JSHint knows, okay, this is where you're getting drone from, and this is where drone's value is. So we don't have any errors now, but there's also nothing between these curly braces. So that means nothing's going to happen if we call that function. Let's use the echo function to make it do something. So I type in echo, open parentheses. Now echo takes a string, and to pass in a string of text, we put it in quotes. You can use either double quotes or single quotes. Either one is okay, but it does have to be in quotes for JavaScript to know it's a string. So the text we wanted to echo out is my cottage goes here, and then I'll put a semicolon at the end of the line to say that we're done with that statement. Now one thing I'll note is that these spaces here at the beginning, brackets, will probably add them for you automatically. If it doesn't, you can press the tab key and it will push you over 4 spaces by default. You don't have to put spaces here, but by convention that's what we do, because it makes it very clear that this is part of this block of code that for the myCottage function. If we weren't indenting everything, if we put everything all at that same level, it would be really hard to see that. Okay, so I can save this. Oh, and now JS hint is giving me that error about echo, because again, we haven't defined where echo comes from, and echo is a global just like require. Scriptcraft just gives that to us. So I can just add echo to the globals, hit save again, and now it's good. Okay, we're ready to try it. So I hop back over to Minecraft. Now it's become night while we were sitting there working in brackets. Okay, so I've got my world open. You type in /js, and then you call the refresh function. Refresh is very cool because it tells Scriptcraft to reload all of its plugins. So we don't need to restart Canary Mod, we don't have to restart Minecraft. As we make changes, we just refresh. So now I should be able to call JS myCottage. Okay, and we can see that we got some output. The first piece of output we got is myCottage goes here, and that is the string that we told it to print. So it printed it. The second line of output that we got is this quote brackets object and then uppercase object close bracket quote. And basically what that's doing is it's telling us that there was an object returned by the myCottage function. Now you might be thinking we didn't do anything to return an object, and you'd be right if you thought that. That is some magic basically that the drone does for us. The drone automatically makes it return an object, and that's you know, normal JavaScript functions don't work that way. But don't worry about that. That's actually a really handy behavior the drone gives us, and we will just ignore that and move on. All right, we're ready to start building. So let's start building by placing the floor. We'll select the contents of that line so we can remove the echo call. And then we will do this. And then in the next line, type down. And then we type dot box blocks.birch 716. So we've seen, oh, and I'll put a semicolon because we're done with that. So we've seen this before. We know about down and up and the different directions you can move the drone. We know about the box function that you can call on it. You can pass in a block type and then the width, height, and depth. So these are things that we've seen. This is not something we've seen. The word this, you can see it's colored just like function. So it's a special word in JavaScript. And what this refers to is basically the current object. So if you put the myCottage function on the drone, when you call that myCottage method on the drone, when you call it in the context of that drone, that means this is going to refer to the drone. So by typing this dot down and dot box, we are calling those on the drone because myCottage is something that we put on the drone itself through this drone.extend. Okay, so now if I save, we can see that that JS hint complains about blocks. It doesn't complain about this because it knows that this is part of JavaScript. It does complain about blocks. So let's go ahead and load in blocks exactly the same way we did for the drone. Okay, so there we go. Var blocks equals require quote blocks quote close parens. So okay, so it's just like the var drone equals. And we do those up at the top of the file so that those names are available for the rest of the file. Okay, let's see what we've done. We switch back over to Minecraft. And then time set 100 to make it daytime again. And then I'm going to go and JS refresh. And remember we used to call up because that's the convention. Given where it's going to start drawing, we want the cottage to be, you know, at ground level. Up dot myCottage, open paren, close paren, and if we do that, we have a floor. So that's a good start to our little cottage. So in part 4, I talked about how you can chain things together when calling the drone, and we've already done a little bit of that by calling down and then box. So we're going to do a bunch more of that to build up the rest of this cottage. So let's see, next we'll go up, and then we're going to clear out the area on top. So we do that by adding air blocks, and we will add 7, 5, and 6. Now one thing about JavaScript also, if I wanted to say that we're going to clear this area, we can do // and that is a line comment. That means that the rest of this line will be ignored by JavaScript. So I can just type clear area first. And that way, you know, if we're looking back at this, we can say, oh yeah, that's where we're going to create the floor. And this is where we're going to clear the area that we're building upon. So next, we will build the 4 walls. So we build a hollow box, that's box 0, blocks.mossstone. Oh yeah, you can see that brackets actually fills in some of the names for you. That makes it a bit easier to work with. 7 to 6, that gives us our walls. Then we'll turn right 270 degrees, and we add ourselves a door, and then we go up, and then we go left by 2. So this is one of those things where if you had a piece of graph paper to work from, if you had some way to draw it out, what you're trying to build, or if you just do it by trial and error, that's how you would figure out how to move the drone. You have to picture in your mind which way the drone is facing and which way it's going to move, and when you draw a shape, which way that shape is going to face. So now let's add a window, a glass pane. And then we need to move right 4 to add the other window, box, blocks.glass pane. And then we need to go left 5, up, and then prism 0. This is a great roof shape for you. So we are going to make a prism out of blocks .stairs.oak. 7, 6. So that is our roof. Okay. So a lot of the Minecraft buildings, you know, they have roofs that are made out of stairs, and that's how it looks. It looks nice. Okay, so then we go down, right 4, back. Okay, and then we're going to add a wall sign. So that is, just as it sounds, it's a sign on a wall. And when we're doing this, we want to basically set a different string for each line, because you know a sign can have 4 lines of text on them. So wall sign is an interesting function because it takes what's called an array. An array is like a list. Use these square brackets, so you can create a square bracket, and it takes an array of strings. We talked about how strings are text, and you have to put them in quotes. So we will make it say my, and then in the next line, cottage. Okay? And then this is all we're going to have for now. We'll close that off, save it, and let us go back to Minecraft and see what we have. Up arrow to refresh, and then up arrow to add a cottage. Okay, and look at that. It built a cottage just like we asked it to. Here are the 2 windows. The sign says my cottage, just as we said. We can open the door, head on inside. Pretty cool. Okay, so the cottage that Scriptcraft creates actually has a couple of furnishings inside. So we want to add those. And to add those, we're going to use another feature that the Scriptcraft drone has called checkpoints, or markers. Basically, what this is all about is marking a spot so that the drone can move from that spot and go do other things and then come back there really easily. So we'll do that right here. Whoops, not move, sorry. It's checkpoint, CHKPT, and then you pass in a string with a name for this checkpoint. So we'll call it cottage. So that is basically the beginning, where that's where the drone starts out. We can get the drone to go back there anytime we need to. So we'll remove our semicolon here because we're going to add more to this line now. And we will tell the drone, after basically making that wall sign, that we want it to move back to the beginning spot, the cut that we called cottage. Then we'll go right 3 and forward 4, and then up, and then we're going to hang a torch. Okay, so hang torch. And these are all just the drone functions. So these are all things that we've seen. Now we'll move back to that beginning spot again. You can see how handy this is. Makes it very easy, or makes it easier to picture in your mind where you're moving, which way the drone's facing, and to continue making progress from that same spot. So we go right, then we go forward. Whoops, forward 3. Okay, and at that spot we want to add a bed. Then we go forward, and we go right 4. And at that spot we want to add a furnace. Okay, and then we will move back to our starting point and leave the drone there. Okay, and we save. I added a semicolon at the end there. So we save it and we head back. It's become nighttime again. Let's fix that. Okay, and now I'm going to just get rid of that block so I can point at this block, because that's the block where we're starting from. Okay, whoops, I forgot to refresh. Let me refresh. Okay, and then I can try building a cottage again. Okay, and it built a cottage again, and we go inside. There's our torch, there's our furnace, there's our bed, and we have a complete cottage. Okay, so we covered a lot in this section. We covered JS hint and these globals in this comment, this JavaScript comment here at the top. We covered the require function and how you can load in modules of various names. We covered how there are strings and you put them in quotes, and that just represents some text. We covered how you can create a variable to give a name to some value. In this case, drone with a capital D is the value that's returned from the require function. We talked about the function keywords. You can make your own functions, and how you have the parentheses here to show that there are no arguments being passed into this one. And you have these curly braces, and the curly braces block off all of the code that is part of that function. So when we run my cottage, this is the set of commands that are going to run. We talked about this. This is a pretty mysterious thing in JavaScript, so we don't have to get too far into that one, but we use it to get access to the drone object from our function here. And then these are all the same kinds of commands that we learned in part 4. And we also learned about calling drone.extend. We pass in our function, and drone.extend is going to add that to the drone. So that's a lot that we covered, but we have an actual working piece of JavaScript here that creates the cottage that Scriptcraft comes with. So speaking of what Scriptcraft comes with, if you look, we opened this plugins folder, and that was where we added mycottage.js. You can see there are actually a bunch of directories with a bunch of other things. If you open up the drone directory, inside you'll see a contrib directory, and this is actually the code for the drone. So you can look at this yourself. You can open these files. I'm sure there's going to be things in here that you'll wonder about, JavaScript things that we haven't talked about yet, that we're going to talk about in a future part. But here, for example, is the cottage. This is the code that we just went through ourselves. only their sign says Home Sweet Home and ours said My Cottage. They've got a cottage road, which I hadn't seen this before. It's pretty cool. You can try that out. But yeah, all these other things that we've built, like the castles and the chessboards, these are all here. So, you know, feel free to poke around in that code, try copying and pasting things, see how it works. But I think a great thing to try out, a great thing to play around with, is you take your My Cottage JavaScript code and you know, just try tweaking it. Try making the cottage your own. See what you can do with it. Can you make it 2 levels? Can you, whatever comes to mind. There are all kinds of things you can do. You could probably give it a different kind of floor. You can put a dance floor in it. Anything you want to do. So that's a good starting point. One thing I would suggest is the code that's actually in the drone contrib directory. Don't change that code in these files. If you want to make changes, if you want to start out with, you know, a castle and then make changes to that, I'd recommend making a new file and copying everything from there into your new file. So that's it for this part. I will see you again in a few days for the next part.